This is the Future of the Future show. I am your host, Mateo Berbejicio. Today, on the Future of the Future, we are joined by someone who embodies the intersection of creativity, entrepreneurship, and human-centered innovation, Simone Vascotto. Simone is a founder, builder, and global thinker whose work spans branding, marketing, human capital, and now, through his latest venture, HumanaQ, the future of how organizations understand and empower their people and their culture. His journey has taken him across industries and across borders, shaping a unique perspective on what it really takes to create companies that are both meaningful and sustainable. In this conversation, we will dig into the origins of HumanaQ, the milestones that shaped Simone's career, and the lessons he's learned about balancing passion and skill with financial sustainability. This is a conversation about culture, vision, discipline, and what it means to build with intention in a world that is constantly changing. Simone, thank you so much for being here.
Fantastic. Thank you for the fabulous introduction, Mateo. It's a pleasure to be here. Fantastic.
Simone, what do you do today for a living?
What do I do? That's a great question. Well, I believe I can now say I do what I've always wanted to do, and that is I have been able to create a system where I'm able to, as you mentioned in introduction, use my creativity and create opportunities with it. So creating opportunities both for myself to be able to do what I'd like to do, but also for others, right? And that means helping others through a service, for instance, like what we provide, or simply quite literally building a team and helping those people and helping the team. So I think that's slowly over time I have understood what the goal is, and I would say we're getting close to it, and this is the right direction. Yeah. If I was to go into more depth now specifically, the title of entrepreneurship, I would like to say that I represent it quite well and slowly more and more. It's not easy for me to say because I'm not someone I don't think that likes to fly really high and but I like to say it now because the business has been mentioned on Forbes, and I feel like only a few people can say that, so that's quite nice. And to give you some background, I have founded a few businesses, let's say three now, at the age of 22. And this last one is HumanaQ, as you said, Matteo. And this is in M&A, in the space of M&A, so mergers and acquisition. Yeah, very happy. Let me know if you'd like me to go into depth, but that's the space I work in.
So much to unpack. So let's go and talk about HumanaQ. What is HumanaQ? What problem are you trying to solve? And why did you decide it was important to build this company?
Absolutely. So HumanaQ is software for business acquisition. That's the dumbest version I can put it for you. When you buy any business, you have to run due diligence. That means understanding essentially what the business is about, how they do things. And one thing that every business depends on are people, right? To preserve and grow the business. And the way people do things, quite literally determines how things are done, how the business runs. And when you acquire business, you want to know that. And that's what we highlight. Usually culture is what we focus on. So the behaviors, the collective behaviors of teams creates the culture. And frankly, culture is not easy to quantify, you can imagine. It's not financial metrics. But with the use of AI, now we've been able to do that. And we're the first company in Europe to do that. I'll take you a step back as to why I got into this. And to do that, we have to go back a year and a half. That's when I started a different startup, which is the pivot that led me to go to this current company. And that was a marketplace for small cap successions. Succession is simply the passage of a company onto another generation within the family or to someone else outside the family. And I started that marketplace because when I was a young boy, I've seen a succession within my own family. Um, I come from Trieste, next to Venice, so this is the northeast of Italy. And having seen my grandfather, who was the entrepreneur of the family, pass the business outside the family, that, that was always with me. And having seen that, given the huge demographic shift happening in Europe and North America, um, I foresee many successions happening, and I wanted to facilitate this process. So when I was at university and I was studying startups, I decided to use this market and help this market, and I created this marketplace for these successions. And I won many pitch events and competitions. So then I had help from a bank and from a municipality, only to realize after graduating and going full time on the startup journey, let's say 8 to 9 months in, that the product was not very useful. And the buyers, you have to connect buyers and the sellers, and the buyers were not so interested in putting some information, so they would reach out to me directly. So let's say there was no problem solution fit. So I took a few steps back, did a lot more research until I had the data to convince myself that culture is the issue. That was the big finding. And I pivoted, rebranded, and partnered with an American company to be able to do this in 4 months. And it's been very good ever since. A good pivot, I would say.
Congratulations, it's an amazing success. And like you said, right, being on the Forbes magazine, it's not a small feat. And doing that at your age, it's an amazing thing. Um, Tell me a little bit more about culture, right? So let's put this in an example for the audience. One company A is acquiring company B. Company A has a certain culture that does not necessarily match that culture of company B, right?
Mhm.
And now two cultures are going to have to merge together, sort of in a way, right?
Yeah, yeah,
Um, and that's a huge thing, right? So how do you even know what the culture of the other company is? And that's where you're going. You are going to analyze the behaviors to understand when we say culture, what is that? How is that defined? Right? Tell me a little bit more about that
absolutely.
and how it
Yeah.
is done.
I think these are key questions, so I'm very happy you've asked them. Um, as I said, culture is the collective, is a set of collective behaviors within a team, right? That determines how things are done, why they're done, how people behave and think, right? So there's two different cultures we look at. One is the visible one, and one is the invisible one, right? The visible one is the values and the strategies that you say you do, and teams say they execute. And the other one is invisible, and that's the one we measure, right? Um, because the first one, it can be the medium with which you communicate your culture, posters, or, that's a very surface level approach. On the other hand, you have the invisible, intangible, and that is the unconscious behavior that when you become part of a group, you take, right? And so it's between the lines. It's things that are not written, but yet teams do. So this can really differ from team to team and within the whole organization. That's what culture is. That's what we measure and do and try to make it a little bit more concrete. We do that simply because, as you said, when you have an acquisition or a merger, you need people to work together somehow, right? You are creating this new alignment and you need the two teams to align. One thing I'd like to add to this before I go in depth is I actually see that every acquisition is a merger. Now, they are distinct, but they do have one quality that for me to be able to say that, and that is there's a common misconception that when one company acquires the other, the one that's buying that one overtakes with their culture. But that doesn't have to be the case, right? Because what we try and do, the whole point, is to highlight what one organization does really well what the other one does really well, and what the new culture can become. Because you will need a new culture, new people, new thinking models are going to come. And so, recently Netflix just mentioned they Warner Bros. Accepted their bid, right? And I was just thinking to myself, it got accepted. Forget about Paramount. Paramount now did something else. But if they do go through, that's going to be a whole set of new challenges because Netflix is a company that's very new, it's very fast, and Warner Bros. May have just different a creative process, very different thinking ways. So that's what we try to highlight before you even decide whether to acquire a company or not. I was speaking with private equities in Germany, for instance, private equity where they do serial acquisitions, and they had acquired a company only to have to fire three-quarters of the workforce, right? So they've bought something for a lot of money to then have to erase and remove and replace. So that's money, time, energy, everything to replace the workforce because it didn't align with the other portfolio companies, right? The people couldn't work very well. It simply didn't work. And so that's what we try to do and quantify and highlight. So if an acquisition works, understanding your own culture, and if you do decide to do with an acquisition, how to integrate, how to make things work.
The interesting thing that comes to mind here is I'm a CEO, right? And so we are talking about visible culture and invisible culture, right?
Yeah.
You have to have a certain ability to be vulnerable because I might have these values and this mission and culture, right? And all it looks great on paper, but now HumanaQ comes into picture, and then maybe you're going to tell me something I don't want to hear. Does that
Mhm.
happen to you, or is there an ideal customer? Is there a prerequisite that customers are willing to hear what you're going to show them? How does that work in your field?
Sure. So if I understand the question correctly, what I have seen is that um, some companies believe they know their culture when they don't, right? And my answer to that is even if you do know it, data tells a different story, right? Um, and maybe it absolutely is correct, but it gives you more details, right? Um, and then it's up to the company. We give the facts, whether they decide to use it to their advantage and perhaps nudge the culture a certain direction, or leave it as is and persevere, right? That's not, our focus isn't just to highlight a company's culture, it's to say this is what this is what it is, and this is how it can work with this other company, right? So we look at it as a blood test, right? In this very simple analogy, where when you take a blood test, you have the data, but you don't know what to do with it. So we are able to give some actionable points based on the benchmarking that we do with our data set. We have accumulated almost 5 million data points now, and which helps us drive these actionable points and conclusions. Uh, and that's it's really up to the company how they want to take it. As I said, it can even destroy a whole deal if the culture is so far apart, because then it just doesn't make any sense. I must also add that what we do focusing on culture only works and is only useful if people are part of the asset of the acquisition. If people are not part of the acquisition, this is pointless. I will be very straightforward with this. When we talk about people, humans are complex. We try to break it down into systems, and we use AI, specifically natural language processing models, that translate words into data, essentially, into quantifiable variables.
Got it. And does it work mostly by running extensive surveys with the different employees of a company and different groups, and you talk to a lot of them, you get the input, and then you use your AI to analyze all of the responses, and then come up with that reading of what the culture is really like?
So cultural due diligence and culture, organizational culture is nothing new. right? It's
Yeah.
not I come here and I create this new system. No, it's a different measuring approach, right? We measure differently. And culture used to be measured, is measured with interviews and surveys usually. The problem with that approach is that interviews take a long time and money, and they're very invasive. You know, when you have a third party come interview your employees, so what's going on? Why are we getting interviewed, right? And surveys is also it's a bit biased. You know, you can craft surveys in a way scientifically that tries to bypass bias, but it's not super easy. So there is always an element of bias, um, and they tend to measure emotion. You know, when you look at HR, they tend to measure personality tests and emotions, but emotions fluctuate. That doesn't mean that that data is useless. I'm just saying that's what I have seen for myself. On the other hand, what we try measure is behavior. Behavior is something that sticks for longer periods of time, usually 100 to 120 days, and then you would have to do another analysis to understand where the culture is moving and more how the behaviors have changed. And this gives you an understanding of the holistic perspective of how things are being done, the approach, the mentality. Um, and to come to your question, this can be done with various levels of management. It can be done with the whole company. Obviously, the more levels and the more people you include, the more data you have, the more accurate your results are. Um, you know, to come to a point on this question is that many M&A professionals use their gut feeling. After a certain amount of deals that they have seen, they can determine, plus or minus what the culture may be by meeting with management. My answer to that is it's a fascinating skill, right? That it's almost a sixth sense, is the intuition they've been able to acquire. What I say though is that you can determine what they are able to understand comes from a handful of people. They're able to read only a handful of people. What about 100 people behind them that work for that management? That's what we try give a better picture of, not just a few handful of people, but we read the whole organization that can draw a different conclusion.
That makes a lot of sense and it's fascinating. Looking back at your journey, Simone, what are the biggest milestones in your career so far, and which ones shaped you the most as an entrepreneur?
Yeah, sure. So, there's a few of them simply because before I worked with startups. I had built also a branding agency during university, which before that was a marketing agency. Um, and so I've had some experience building entities and just trying to see where product market fit exists. The first thing that comes to mind is what I have understood about entrepreneurship is vision comes first in a team. If the team is not aligned on a vision, no matter if you have the skill set, it won't work. To give you an example, when I had received outside of university the help from a bank and municipality, and I continued for 1 year full time, the startup idea, the team split up, and then I had to find another team. And I found another team, I built another team, and that team split up again. And then it was always me by myself again. So what I noticed is you can have the skills, but especially at the beginning when the teams are small, if you don't align on the vision and the purpose, it's really, really difficult, right? Um, and another one that I was thinking recently, given the mention on forums, the business was mentioned on forums, is that along your journey, I think you have some signs, if you will, that the direction is the right one or not, right? And for instance, a very interesting one is I was in a WhatsApp group chat with 700 entrepreneurs in the Netherlands, in Amsterdam. I never opened that group chat. And one day I randomly opened it, and I find this one message, and this young founder that I looked up to had said, "Come to the open day to our office. We're having people over." And mind you, 2 weeks before, I really was hoping, dreaming to find an office for my new startup right out of university. I never opened that group chat. I was part of it for a long time. I opened that message. I go to the um, open day, and I end up part of the office. And that's really where my startup journey went, right? So there are some signs because that's really fascinating. You never open the group chat out of hundreds of messages. I see this one. It's crazy, right? So there are signs, and the last point, if three is a good point to try remember 3 points. The last one is truly to something I have learned is it's sometimes it's really hard to some people outside of the entrepreneurial world, it's hard to align with them when you talk about some of ambitions and things, and it can really throw you off sometimes when you say, what you're doing, why you're doing it. And so you just have to remember to truly remain in your lane because it's a different lane. It's a completely different lane. It is so different that there's no point in trying to explain sometimes. Um, because it's impacted me before, and there's always going to be doubts, but just remember it's your own lane because it can be very different.
And there's something about that lane, um, on the importance of balancing passion, skill, and financial sustainability when you're building a startup, right? And you've talked about that. Um, what lessons have you learned about that sweet spot, right? When you're an entrepreneur and you're trying to balance passion, skill, financial sustainability, are there things that you have learned that you would like to share with the audience?
Passion, skill, and financial sustainability. It's always a trifecta like that that's hard
Yeah.
to achieve, right? In general, you only have two, or from one side or the other. I don't think I have a one solution or a single bullet point that I can tell you, do this, do that. I don't think there's a black or white answer to the question. What I can tell you from my learning is hone in on what you're good at. Focus on what you're good at. So that comes skill. You tend to like what you're good at, so then passion kind of tends to tag along, right?
Yep. Yep.
Because as you develop a skill, you become good at it. You like it because you're good at it. And then you can also just over time, I'll steal this from Alex Hormozy because I'm sure you know him, zigzag in the right direction, right? So you just
Yeah.
try a lot of things, you learn what you like, and then you just focus in that direction and you zigzag, right? So that's what I've done personally, and it's worked out very well. I just tried a lot of things. And then the financial part is it comes down to research. As an entrepreneur, it comes down to research and conviction. When I was pivoting from the marketplace onto the cultural due diligence and organizational culture company, HumanaQ, that we now run, before just jumping, I didn't have this other idea, and I just said, okay, let's do this one now. No, I took solid 2 to 3 months off
Hmm.
where I quite literally was a bit scared because I wasn't doing much. But the full time, what I was doing was research. It was research to understand the market. I must have spoken with hundreds, not 200, but over 100, under 200 professionals to understand the pain points. I did surveys with all my LinkedIn network, and I had data to support myself and say this makes sense. And then I went in to do it, right? So then that all already gives you a foundation without investing much money at all, whether this something makes sense and whether it can be financially sustainable in the long run, right?
Right.
Then you can think about business models, but that's the foundation as to what I use to say this makes sense. Let's do it. People are willing to pay for it.
I like it. Let's talk a little bit about your background in marketing, branding, and human capital. How does that background influence the way you build and position a startup today, especially something like HumanaQ?
So I started a marketing agency at university because I come from an engineering background, industrial engineering. And immediately when I was doing engineering, I realized product was not the final part of the story. The tangible product was not the final part.
Yep.
I needed to know how to sell and tell the whole story. That's why I like to story tell. And so what I ended up doing is I wanted to build my own product, but it cost too much capital. 3D printing, modeling, it takes a lot of capital. So because of this willingness to create, I went into service. Service doesn't require money, it requires time. So that's why I went to marketing. And that's what I really enjoyed marketing, understanding it. And I had this marketing agency for restaurants in the city and cafes where they could have ads. What I didn't like about that is that it was quite unoriginal because at the time running ads was quite normal,
Yep.
from for SaaS, and so it wasn't really my passion, if you will. It was like it was interesting to learn, and that's the zigzag, right? I tried it, I learned about it. It was cool, but not my thing. So like zag back, right? And that's when I then understood that I prefer branding, right? The two are very interconnected, but branding is very sometimes hard to determine how do you communicate it? What are the pillars of branding, right? And so that's how towards the end of the life, if you will, of that company, I pivoted towards the branding because the branding for bigger companies or for organizations can be very, very valuable.
Yep.
And that's when I really studied the study of branding. To come back to your question, that knowledge from zigging and zagging comes back to me applying it. And I would like to use HumanaQ as an example where we went from 0 to 4 months to be mentioned in quite a few magazines, right?
Right.
And I think what the foundation is understanding the market, understanding the need, and once you have that foundation, you know how to place it. You know how to position yourself. I understand that it's a niche, and that's exactly the play we wanted to do because there's not a lot of players, and we want to stand out. We also need to know who we are looking at, so we have to appeal a certain way. We can't be too AI. That's why HumanaQ doesn't scream AI
Right.
because otherwise, it's gonna scare away people as well in my
Right.
sector, right? It's not, I don't go tell, we're not the purple logo, we're not the red, we're not yellow. We have to also be quite financial, right? Um, and so I believe over time I've accumulated these elements of understanding, the branding elements and communication elements. Um, and especially research. I think again it comes down to that because if you know that information, then you can translate it into all these other elements and then communicate it. So, unless you want some practical examples, but yeah, that's what I would say.
No, I love it, and it's I love the zigzag and your background and from engineering to marketing to like really understanding everything that surrounds building and launching a venture, right? At the end of the day. So it's amazing. So when we were getting ready for this podcast, we were talking about some of your experiences, and you mentioned a point in time where you were running two startups at the same time, right? Running a startup is hard. Running two or more, I don't want to even imagine. Uh, what's your advice for founders consider doing the same?
Don't do it. Don't do it. You disperse your energy and time. And worst of all, there's only so much creative space you can hold on to or
Right.
use. It's very, very hard to switch your head from five. I would quite literally do 4 to 5 hours on one of them and 4 to 5 hours on another one. It's 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 massively difficult. The first 3 hours or 2 hours after switching were useless.
Hmm.
It was a waste of time. It was really inefficient work. It was very difficult, at least for me. This is my experience, mind you. Maybe someone else is much better. They can delegate tasks. They can, organize better. But from my experience, it was quite difficult. Switching, especially the creative mind, which I like to use in every facet of the business, whether it's marketing, sales, whatever it is, it's quite difficult. So at the time, I had built this other application, which was journaling, right? So over the summer, I realized that it was really hard to appreciate memories and photos. And so I'm not a developer, so I set out to find developers and software engineers around my area and in the Netherlands. And I found them, I recruited them, and I said, let's build it. At the beginning, it was fine because it was them building it, but it required a lot of time regardless. Over time, and the two things just merge. And so you really have to decide, right? You should do the one that you should consider a few factors. So the market, the competition, all these very basic elements that I'm sure everyone knows. But when you do have to select, it's not easy. And for me, what made it extra difficult was the fact that I started this other company with my friends,
Ah,
right? Now, do you start a company with your friends? Very difficult question, that one, because especially for me, because I couldn't leave my friends all of a sudden, but I
right.
have to do both, right? So it was my friends, and then I actually, for a period, my friend and I, you know, we weren't speaking as much, right? Because there was things in the
Mm.
way. It wasn't moving forwards. But I wanted them to move forward. So then I recruited someone else. And then they were, so there's a lot of intricate parts that come into this. And ultimately it comes down to how much you know about the market and the conviction that you've been able to gather for yourself to go full throttle.
I like it. I like what you said about you leverage creativity a lot, and that creativity needs time and space and focus, right? And switching
Absolutely.
kind of kills that creativity. Yeah.
100%. It's really difficult. I mean, I don't know how else to visually describe it because it's just it takes a lot of energy. And so
Yeah.
when you're in that mindset, having to fully shift, it's almost like opening up a new book and like trying to refine the page you were just at.
Yeah.
That's the best depiction I can give you. It's like, I forgot my marker. I have to find it. And once you find it, you're tired by that time anyway.
Yeah.
So yeah,
Um, Simone, you worked, studied, and lived in different countries. How has that global exposure shaped your worldview, your leadership style, and the way that you design organizational culture and products?
repeat the last part, please. How I assign
And the way you design organizational
design. Right.
culture and products.
Good. I left Italy around the age of 9 or 10. Um, and then I went to the Netherlands. Then I went to Germany and then back to the Netherlands. And now I'm in the beautiful city of Barcelona, Spain, which is my favorite because it's close to where I come from with the weather and everything. But no, the international experience has definitely changed a couple of things. The Italian mindset when I go back is a bit different. It's a bit more stagnant. So I can tell you that that's definitely something I managed to get rid of. Um, I mean, just as anyone that travels and has an international experience, you naturally kind of have to open your mind up to other perspectives and ideologies. And so that's something that I take to heart very much, especially with leadership and teamwork, right? It's trying to remove any assumptions and just really taking into consideration anything, any ideas, any thoughts, or how something could be used. Uh, you know, there's many. I see it as many various colors that you can, many shades that you can use to your advantage. And so it's really about hearing someone else's opinion. I actually like to be quiet most of the time just to hear other people talk, right? I like to talk myself, but I have to be careful, right? Not to dim someone's light or wait for them to just express. So that's something that I like to say, I consider. Um, and another one is that perhaps I do have a bit of an international culture myself now that I have, kind of, yeah, just taken to heart because it's traveling around the world. I've met many, many international people, and so my culture is not just Italian, but it's international, maybe even American, if you will, just because that's the international standard. I don't know, but I would say perhaps that's what it is. And so having that perspective has definitely changed my approach to things. And um, as I said, teamwork wise, that's one way to do it. Um, um, but also my mindset to difficult times. I think that's changed it. When you get to see how many different cultures approach to difficult times and how people think, you start to just grab the little good parts from everyone. Yeah, I like this, I like that, I like this, and you take it. And so, I have many characteristics that I'm consciously aware of great people around me that I like that. How I speak or how I do certain things in certain very peculiar or small scenarios. So that's something that I've noticed. Absolutely.
It's amazing and it shows, right? I think you were describing kind of an international identity, and I've seen a lot of people that have that type of identity, and certainly you have it in the way of the breadth of thought, right? And just that ability to pick the best in each of them. So thank you. Simone, this has been an amazing conversation. I appreciate it. It has been amazing to learn more about HumanaQ and everything that you do. And hopefully we can stay in touch, and then do this again sometime in the future and see where you are with your entrepreneurship journey.
Absolutely. I'd love to. It was a pleasure being here. Next challenge is just scaling up. So that's a new one that I've never had to encounter. So that's ready for 2026. But again, thank you, Matteo, for having me. It's been a pleasure. Looking forward to staying in touch as well.